Recovering from a fierce battle never stopped Luffy from enjoying a party, or eating, especially when it involved meat. And he wasn't going to stop now, and so they all did despite their injuries. The very night following Hiyori's ascension to daimyo, Luffy, Trafalgar Law, Eustace, Captain Kidd and their respective nakamas, Kinemon and his Akayaza 9, and all their friends who had joined them in the final battle, celebrated like never before in Wano. This particular banquet was held in the grand hall of an ornate mansion previously owned by Lord Orochi. Somehow it didn't feel quite as home-y as the ruins of the familial Kozuki estate before it was utterly destroyed by Kaido's dragon blast breath. Still, while that was being rebuilt, the friends needed a place to stay during the celebrations, and a base of operations while they went about starting to rebuild the country. Tonight though, even the usually somber Law and the hot-tempered Kid were able to put aside their differences to enjoy the festivities. That said, there was still a pressing question on the minds of the now three highest bounty captains of the worst generation. One Yonko was gone, and Big Mom and Blackbeard and their respective allies were still out there in the New World. Big Mom and her family had fled when Kaido fell. So now with copies of all four poneglyphs in one place because for the sake of the story, they found the fourth red poneglyph in another location, maybe Arabasta, and before anyone else had a chance to strike back, who would set out first from Wano, locate Laugh Tale and claim the One Piece, and the title of King of the Pirates. In accordance with Pirate Code, the three finally agreed to wait until after the festivities, and leave Wano at the same time on their own respect towards the convergence point of the poneglyphs. And Luffy, being Luffy, gave them each copies of his copies of the ancient writings, to make it fair, because where would be the fun otherwise? Typical Luffy. Nami thought to herself as she sat with her captain and Nakama sipping sake while he scarfed meat by the ton. She wore her blue kimono embroidered with pink flowers as a memento from her time in Ebisu town, one of the most eye-opening experiences of her life, which she would keep close to her heart. Her captain, not caring in the slightest how he looked, kept to his usual garb plus cape as a testimony to his victory. Still she looked to him smiling. The navigator had to admit to herself, she had come to care deeply for the lovably dense rubber man that changed so many lives, not least her own. After years enslaved by Arlong, Luffy and friends had finally set her free. She could never thank them enough for the happy times she shared with them on their adventures. Wonderful idiot, she thought, still looking at him, smiling. And speaking of happy, this was also a celebration for the Mugiwara of their newest crewmate, Jinbei, officially joining up. Sadly, it also meant saying farewell to a few friends. Momo would of course be staying to support his sister, and Kinemon his lord, as well as making up for lost time with his wife who had recently been recovered relatively unharmed, in the rebuilding of their kingdom. Duke Dogstorm and Master Catviper would also be staying for the time being as a matter of duty to their fallen lord and his heirs, which meant Carrot would soon be returning to Zou to help her friend Wanda in managing the city until the return of its rightful two rulers. Yamato, since officially allying with Luffy, had finally made peace with his identity, but still sought to honor his idol Odin's example and would in time set off to see the world for himself. Nami was disappointed to lose another heavy hitter for Team Luffy, but could hardly blame him for staying true to his dream. And if she was honest, she knew it would have got awkward in the long run, particularly at meal and bath times. Poor Sanji couldn't look at him without curling into fetal position, tearfully muttering, "Men everywhere." And frankly she'd had enough of Brook asking her if it would be appropriate to ask to see his panties, and punctuating every "no" with a whack from her Klimatact. Nami's musings were interrupted by the arrival of three people to their table. She now recognized them as part of the infamous Revolutionary Army, and had themselves helped in tracking down and rounding up many of Kaido's subordinates. One was a tall blond man with a scar on the left side of his face which did not mar his fierce but kind eyes. He was dressed rather like a noble man, in a top hat, ascot, fancy waistcoat and long black overcoat over blue trousers. However, the goggles on his hat and the lead pipe strapped to his back didn't really seem to match up with the formal attire. To his left stood a shapely, short orange-haired woman wearing a red newsboy cap, pink shirt, red mini skirt and thigh-high brown leather boots. To his right, an elderly fish man with long gray hair and a trimmed mustache, wearing a karate gi and black belt. "Long time no see, a Luffy," the blond man said with a familiarity that surprised Nami. She was all the more surprised when Zoro, Usopp and Frankie greeted them equally warmly, in particular Robin with a slight red tinge to her face towards the woman, and Luffy towards the man. She wasn't at all surprised though by Sanji joyously greeting the attractive woman with hearts in his eyes. Nami just sweat dropped. Luffy turned to Nami smiling, in spite of tears freely falling from his eyes. Tears. "Nami, say hi to my brother Sabo. Where stories live, discover now."